Deep within an ancient forest, where the sun's rays struggle to pierce through the dense canopy, lies a place shrouded in shadow and silence. Here, the air is thick with the scent of damp earth, and the only sounds are the faint rustle of unseen creatures and a chilling wind that seems to whisper secrets to the trees. At the very heart of this untouched wilderness stands a cabin, its weathered wood blackened by time and its windows fractured as though something or someone had tried desperately to escape. This is no ordinary cabin. It feels alive, exuding an aura that sends shivers down the spine of anyone who dares come near. For generations, locals have avoided these woods, speaking in hushed tones of an unseen force that watches, waits, and sometimes takes. But why does it linger here? What tragedy binds it to this forsaken place? And who would dare to step inside, knowing the stories? Tonight, we invite you to journey into these haunted woods, to stand in the shadow of this ominous cabin, and to confront the mysteries lurking within. What brought our protagonist to this cursed ground? What secrets does she hope to uncover? And at what cost? Stay with us as we unravel a tale of suspense, where every heartbeat feels louder and every shadow hides a question no one dares to answer. Now turning to Eleanor Whitmore, our story introduces a journalist unlike any other. Reserved but unyielding, Eleanor has dedicated her life to uncovering truths that most would rather leave buried. Her fascination with the unexplained began years ago, a passion born not only from curiosity, but from something far more personal. Behind her cautious demeanor lies a resolve forged through loss, a tragedy that marked her life and left her searching for answers in places others fear to tread. Eleanor's work has taken her to countless sites of alleged paranormal activity, each investigation sharpening her instincts and fueling her determination. But this journey is different. This time, it is not just about uncovering a story. It is about uncovering a piece of her own past. Among the few possessions left by her late father, Eleanor found an old, weathered journal. Its pages are filled with fragmented notes and cryptic warnings, all pointing to one location, a secluded cabin in the woods. The words scrawled across the journal's brittle pages suggest more than curiosity. They carry an ominous edge, cautioning against venturing too close. Yet, Eleanor cannot ignore the connection. The journal hints at a mystery that feels deeply personal, one tied inexplicably to her father's last days. Though every warning urges her to stay away, she is drawn to the cabin, compelled by the possibility of answers long buried. Analytical yet empathetic, she is not one to shy away from danger if it means uncovering the truth. And so, armed with little more than her instincts and determination, Eleanor sets out for the woods, unaware of what awaits her in the shadow of the cabin. With her every step, the forest seems to close in, as though sensing her arrival. What secrets lie in wait for Eleanor, and how far will she go to uncover them? As the next phase of the journey comes into focus, imagine stepping into a place where time itself seems to falter. The cabin's location is buried deep within an endless stretch of remote woods, a place untouched by the modern world. Towering trees with gnarled branches form a dense canopy, their silhouettes twisting like skeletal fingers against the dim light that barely filters through. The air here carries a peculiar weight, thick with the earthy aroma of moss and decaying leaves. Every step Eleanor takes is accompanied by the crunch of branches underfoot and the occasional distant rustle, as if the forest itself is alive, watching her every move. The silence is haunting, broken only by the sporadic cry of an animal or the faint whisper of wind weaving through the trees. And then, through the oppressive gloom, the cabin appears. Hunched and weathered, it stands like a relic of a forgotten era. The wood is darkened with age, each panel warped and splintered, as though the structure has struggled under the weight of time. Shattered glass clings to the edges of window frames, jagged shards reflecting what little light dares to approach. The door bears ominous scars, deep claw marks etched into its surface, as though some unseen force had once tried to tear its way inside. Vines curl around the foundation like veins, and patches of the roof sag dangerously, hinting at decades of neglect. Despite its dilapidated state, the cabin seems to exude a defiant presence, as though it refuses to give way to the wilderness around it. Yet it is not just the cabin that feels alive. The very atmosphere that shrouds it is steeped in unease. A chill lingers in the air, and the faintest echo of something unidentifiable seems to hum just out of reach, teasing the edges of perception. It is the kind of place that seems permanently suspended between the natural and the unnatural, where every creak and shadow feels deliberate, as though the cabin itself is aware of Eleanor's arrival. This is no ordinary setting. It is a harbinger, a silent keeper of secrets that has waited patiently for her to step across its threshold. Now turning to the legend that cloaks this forbidding cabin in an air of dread, one begins to understand why its name stirs unease among those who dare to speak of it. For generations, the locals have treated this area with a mix of fear and reverence, avoiding it as though crossing its invisible boundaries would awaken something best left undisturbed. They whisper of an invisible force, an entity that neither walks nor rests, but exists everywhere and nowhere at once, known only through the forbidding tales of those who claim to have survived near encounters. This entity is said to prey upon the uninvited, feeding not on flesh, but on the very essence of those who stray too close. It is not simply seen or heard, they say. It is felt a suffocating presence that seeps into the soul, unraveling one's resolve and amplifying their worst fears. The folklore surrounding the cabin tells of campers who vanished without a trace, possessions left behind in a scene frozen mid-action, as though they had been plucked from existence in an instant. Some daring hunters and wanderers who ventured too close recount hearing whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, disembodied voices calling their names in tones that mimicked their loved ones. They describe the feeling of being watched, every hair standing on end, as though unseen eyes tracked their every movement. One man, decades ago, was said to have stumbled home in a delirium, muttering of shadows that moved against the light and hands that brushed past him in the unbroken stillness of the air. He never returned to the woods, and his story became another cautionary tale, buried in the shared memory of the town. The origins of this mysterious force seem deeply tied to the cabin's history, adding a chilling layer to its legend. Local stories suggest that its first owner, a reclusive settler who built the cabin in the early 1800s, disappeared under inexplicable circumstances. One stormy night, neighbors reported seeing an unnatural glow emanating from the cabin's windows, only to wake the next morning to find it ominously dark and silent. When they finally dared to investigate, they found no sign of the settler, only his belongings untouched and claw marks etched deeply into the walls, eerily resembling those on the door today. Some theorize that the entity is a residual echo of his fate, a shadow of anguish or rage that has lingered, bound to the site through some unknown force. Others believe the land itself is cursed, tainted long before the cabin was ever built, with the settler merely waking something ancient that had slumbered beneath. This swirling blend of folklore and fear has cemented the cabin's reputation as a place that defies explanation, a space where the natural bends to the will of the unnatural. As Eleanor stands before it, she is not just confronting a structure weathered by time, but stepping into a web of history thick with unanswered questions and unsettling possibilities. What waits for her inside remains unknowable, but one thing is clear: this is no place for the faint of heart. With the next phase of the journey in sight, Eleanor's path to the cabin begins to unfold through a series of unexpected and mysterious events. It all starts when she discovers an anonymous envelope slipped under her apartment door, its surface worn and weathered, as though it had traveled across decades to reach her. Inside lies an old, hand-drawn map, its edges fragile and yellowed, guiding her to a remote part of the woods she had only read about in passing references. Alongside the map is an object that sends a chill down her spine, a rusted locket identical to the one her late father used to wear, the same one she buried with him years ago. The locket's presence is impossible to explain, yet it feels like an undeniable call, one she cannot ignore. Despite the warnings from locals who urge her to stay away, weaving tales of danger and despair, Eleanor's resolve only grows stronger. Her father's cryptic mentions of the cabin, written in the margins of his journals, coupled with this eerie delivery, convince her there is something deeply personal at stake, answers that have eluded her for far too long. She packs with methodical precision, bringing along essentials: a flashlight, a notebook, and her father's journal, whose pages have guided her in countless investigations, but never into something that feels this perilous. As she ventures deeper into the woods, the atmosphere begins to shift, as if the very environment senses her purpose. The trees grow denser, their twisted branches forming unnatural shapes against the dimming light. An ominous quiet settles around her, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind, though no breeze is felt on her skin. The air grows heavier, each breath requiring more effort, as if the forest itself resists her intrusion. In the distance, dark clouds gather and roll, threatening a storm that seems intent on mirroring the unease building in her chest. Her flashlight flickers as she navigates the uneven terrain, casting fleeting glimmers of light onto what appear to be faint, claw-like marks etched into the nearby trees. Unsettled but undeterred, Eleanor presses forward, her heart pounding as shadows seem to dart just beyond her line of sight. She tells herself it's just the play of light and imagination, but her grip tightens around the journal as if it could offer her some form of protection. The moment arrives when she crosses the final ridge, and there it stands, the cabin she has read and dreamed about, but never thought she'd see with her own eyes. Its silhouette looms ominously against the backdrop of a sky lit with flashes of distant lightning, the aged wood and shattered windows exuding a presence far beyond mere neglect. Each step closer seems to amplify the pressure in the air, the sense of being watched now unmistakable. A chill runs down her spine as she reaches the door, its surface marred with deep claw marks that look impossibly fresh amidst the weathered facade. Pausing for a moment to steady her breathing, Eleanor places her hand on the doorknob, the cold metal sending a shiver through her fingertips. With a mix of trepidation and determination, she turns it slowly. The door creaks open, revealing a foreboding darkness that seems to spill out into the night, as if the cabin itself is exhaling after years of silence. Stepping inside, she feels the weight of countless unanswered questions bearing down on her, knowing that whatever she is about to uncover, there will be no turning back. Now turning to Eleanor's first night in the cabin, an unsettling stillness envelops the room as she steps inside, her flashlight casting trembling beams of light across the dust-covered floor. The air feels stagnant, heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay. She sets her belongings down on a creaky table near the center of the room, its surface riddled with deep grooves that suggest years of neglect, or something far more intentional. As hours tick by, the oppressive silence is broken only by the rhythmic ticking of her wristwatch, each second amplifying the eerie quiet that surrounds her. She moves cautiously through the cabin's shadowed corners, her flashlight briefly illuminating peculiar details, a faint handprint smudged on the inside of a fogged window, a chair slightly askew, and a mirror with cracks that seem to form a maze of unnatural patterns. Despite her logical mind, the house feels alive, an unspoken presence weighing on her every move. Sitting near the table, she begins jotting notes in her journal, recounting every detail of the day's journey. Yet her thoughts are interrupted by a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a soft creak that seems to come from one of the back rooms. She freezes, her pen hovering above the page as her eyes dart toward the source of the noise. It could easily be the old beams settling, she reasons, though her pounding heart betrays her attempt at rationality. She calls out, her voice barely more than a whisper, but the cabin offers no reply. Later, as she prepares a makeshift sleeping area on the floor, the sensation of being watched grows unbearably strong. She glances repeatedly over her shoulder, convinced she might catch a glimpse of something, or someone lingering in the periphery. Of course, there's nothing there, at least nothing she can see. Moments of uneasy quiet are punctuated by small but deliberate disturbances. A chair she swears was facing one way earlier now points toward the center of the room. The door she had tightly closed upon arriving is now ajar, swinging gently as though nudged by an unseen hand. The flashlight flickers again, briefly plunging her into darkness before sputtering back to life. She clutches it tightly, her breathing shallow and quick, and then it happens, the sound that solidifies her fear. A loud, deliberate thud reverberates through the walls, as if someone or something struck the wooden frame with force. She stiffens, her pulse racing as her mind scrambles for an explanation. Before she can take another breath, a whisper brushes past her ear, faint but unmistakable. Her name, Eleanor. All at once, the fragile barrier between logic and terror shatters. She remains frozen, her eyes wide, every muscle in her body locked in place. It's no longer a question of whether she is alone. The cabin has made it clear. She is not. Now turning to the next phase of Eleanor's unsettling experience, her racing heartbeat begins to steady as curiosity takes root amidst her fear. Determined to understand the cabin's secrets, she steels herself and grabs her flashlight, its beam now casting a steadier glow as she explores the dim interior. Her eyes scan the room, searching for anything to anchor her to reason, anything that might explain the disturbances. That's when her fingers graze something unusual beneath the edge of a dusty old rug. She crouches down, noticing a slight unevenness in the wooden floorboards. With trembling hands, she tugs at the rug, revealing a loose plank that creaks as she pries it open. What she finds beneath sends a chill through her. A worn leather-bound journal, its surface cracked and discolored, as if it had been hidden there for decades. Carefully, she flips it open, the brittle pages releasing a faint smell of aged paper. The handwriting inside is unmistakably her father's, a fact that leaves her breathless. His familiar looping script fills the pages, alternating between hurried notes and detailed sketches. The words speak of an entity tied to the cabin, a force he had been investigating before his mysterious disappearance. Phrases like "it watches," "do not trust the silence," and "the cabin was never meant to be found" leap out at her, painted in ink that has faded over time but still carries an air of urgency. Alongside the words are illustrations, some of strange symbols carved into wood, others of distorted, shadowy figures that seem neither human nor animal. As she continues to leaf through the journal, more discoveries emerge. Tucked between the pages, she finds an old photograph. The image is grainy, but clear enough to reveal a family standing in front of the cabin. Her breath catches as she recognizes her father as a young boy, standing at the edge of the group, his expression unreadable. The faces of the others are blurred, as though smeared by time, yet their presence adds weight to the unsettling mystery. Nearby, etched into the cabin wall, she notices a symbol, a match to one sketched in the journal. It is intricate, almost ritualistic, its meaning unknown but undeniably significant. Her father's notes grow darker as the entries progress. Words like "trapped," "sacrificed," and "she will understand" appear scrawled in uneven lines, as if written in a state of desperation. The last page contains only a single sentence, written in bold, jagged letters. The cabin's secret is not its own. The cryptic message stirs something deep within her, a mix of dread and determination. Elsewhere, her search uncovers another chilling discovery. Scrawled faintly on the back of the door, in ink barely visible under the beam of her flashlight, is a message: "Leave now or join us." The faded letters feel both a warning and a threat, and yet Elena cannot shake the sense that she is being drawn deeper into the cabin's enigma, as if leaving is no longer an option. With every clue, the line between her father's warnings and her own reality blurs further. What brought him here? What did he seek to uncover? And most pressing of all, what did he uncover that left him stranded in silence? Each revelation pulls her further from safety, yet she cannot stop. Her father's journal lies in her hands like a key, though to what, she cannot yet say. And so, as the night presses on, Elena finds herself unable to retreat, her desire for answers now outweighing her fear of the unseen force that seems to mark her every step. Moving forward, Elena's relentless search for answers takes her beyond the confines of the eerie cabin and into the nearest town, a modest settlement nestled against the dense woods. Here the air feels heavier, weighed down by an unspoken knowledge that seems to ripple through the few residents who wander its quiet streets. As Elena steps into a small, dimly lit general store to gather supplies, her casual questions about the cabin are met with visible discomfort. The storekeeper, a wiry man with a nervous demeanor, falters as she mentions the location. His hands, previously steady as they sorted items on the counter, now tremble slightly. He mumbles something under his breath before abruptly shifting the conversation to the weather, refusing to meet her gaze. Undeterred, Elena decides to probe further, visiting a nearby diner where a handful of locals sit in silence, their conversations hushing the moment she enters. She sits at the counter and begins asking about the cabin, Most ignore her, their eyes quickly averting, but one older woman, seated in the corner and clutching a cup of coffee, breaks the uneasy quiet. Her voice is low and steady as she warns Eleanor. "Some questions should stay unanswered, dear. That place has taken enough." The other patrons shift uncomfortably, one of them muttering, "You should leave before nightfall." Despite the vague responses, Eleanor's persistence pays off when she encounters a reclusive villager who reluctantly agrees to speak to her. He is an elderly man with a face etched by time and eyes, carrying the weight of countless untold stories. Inviting her to sit on the porch of his weathered home, he lights a pipe, his gnarled fingers shaking as he inhales deeply. His voice, though raspy, carries an undeniable authority as he begins to recount his own chilling experience. He tells her of a night many years ago when he and a group of friends had dared to venture near the cabin, drawn by foolish curiosity and campfire tales. As they approached, the air grew unnaturally cold, their flashlights flickering before extinguishing entirely. Then came the whispers, soft at first, growing louder until they drowned out all other sound. He speaks of a force he could not see but could feel, an oppressive presence that seemed to move around them, watching, judging. One by one, his friends disappeared into the darkness, their cries for help cutting off abruptly. He alone managed to stumble back to town, his hair turned white overnight and his memories fragmented, as though the entity had taken something from him. As he finishes his account, the old man fixes Eleanor with a grave expression. "You think you're looking for answers," he says, his voice trembling slightly, "but that place, it doesn't give. It only takes." His words linger with her, a stark reminder of the danger she faces. But even as his warning echoes in her mind, Eleanor knows she cannot turn back. The pull of the cabin and the secrets it holds remains too strong to resist. With her father's journal clutched tightly in her hand, she steels herself for what lies ahead, aware that each new step brings her closer to a truth she may not be ready to face. With the next phase of the journey in sight, Eleanor returns to the cabin, her determination battling the unease that has settled deep within her. The air inside feels heavier now, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. That night, as storm clouds gather outside, the entity begins to make its presence unmistakably known. Eleanor wakes abruptly to the sound of something scraping against the wooden floor, a slow, deliberate movement that sends a chill racing down her spine. Striking a match to light her lantern, she notices her belongings are no longer where she left them. Her notebook is placed neatly on the chair across the room, a chair she had not touched, and her flashlight sits upright on the floor, its glass cracked. The cabin, once eerily silent, now seems alive with faint whispers, unintelligible yet insistent, weaving through the air like a sinister melody just out of reach. By morning, she finds fresh claw marks carved into the cabin door, long and jagged, as though made by something not entirely human. Though her thoughts urge her to leave, her instincts keep her rooted as she recalls the purpose of her journey. Each passing hour seems to draw her deeper into the entity's grasp, but Eleanor remains resolute, determined to uncover the truth. When night falls again, and she settles in to write her observations, the whispers shift to guttural growls, reverberating through the walls with unnerving intensity. Her lantern flickers violently, as if the very light is under attack, and she feels the chilling sensation of an icy hand brushing the back of her neck. Spinning around, she sees nothing but the darkened corners of the room, Yet the feeling of being watched grows heavier, more oppressive, suffocating in its intensity. Then, just as her resolve begins to waver, she catches it, a fleeting shadow, impossibly quick, darting across the window. It has no defined form, no substance, yet its presence is undeniable, a manifestation of something ancient and hostile. Eleanor grips her father's journal tightly, her heart pounding as she realizes the whispers have started to form words, faint and malicious, warning her to leave. But she knows turning back is no longer an option. The entity isn't just making its presence known, it's declaring its control, showing her that she is trespassing where she does not belong. As the next challenge unfolds, Eleanor's determination pushes her to delve deeper into the truth beneath the cabin's haunting presence. Exhaustion weighs heavy, but she presses on, driven by an unshakable sense that the answers lie within reach. While exploring the dimly lit corners of the cabin, her attention is drawn to an uneven floorboard near the hearth. With careful effort, she pries it loose, revealing a small compartment hidden beneath. Inside is an object wrapped in age-worn fabric, the faint scent of earth clinging to it. Unfolding the fabric, she discovers an old letter, its edges brittle and ink, faded but still legible enough to decipher. The letter, dated more than a century ago, is addressed to a woman named Margaret Whitmore, Eleanor's great-great-grandmother. It speaks of a tragedy that befell the family, recounting how Margaret sought shelter in this very cabin after losing her husband and child under mysterious circumstances. The writer of the letter details how Margaret, consumed by grief, performed rituals in desperation to summon her loved ones back, unwittingly inviting something far darker into the world. The entity was not born of malice, but of anguish, a relentless force tethered to the echoes of Margaret's sorrow. Eleanor reads each line with growing intensity, her mind racing as the puzzle pieces fall into place. That night, armed with the journal and the letter, Eleanor ventures just beyond the cabin into the woods, guided by a sudden compulsion she cannot fully explain. The whispers seem to steer her path, less hostile now and more like a mournful calling. She stumbles upon a small clearing where a crude circle of stones surrounds a weathered altar etched with cryptic symbols matching those in her father's journal. The air feels thick, heavy with the weight of countless years. Kneeling down, Eleanor feels as though the forest itself is holding its breath as fragmented images flash before her eyes. A spectral vision of Margaret, her face etched with despair, performing the rituals that tethered the entity to this place. Eleanor's fear slowly gives way to understanding. The entity is not merely a ghost or a shadow. It is a manifestation of pain, locked in a cycle of torment and rage. She realizes that her connection to this place is not coincidental. It is her family's legacy, passed down through generations in the form of her father's obsession with uncovering the truth. The whispers now seem almost coherent, a mix of pleading and warning. For the first time, Eleanor senses that this entity is not just a predator, but also a prisoner trapped in its own suffering. Yet beneath that sorrow, there is a warning, a desperate insistence for Eleanor to leave while she still can. Eleanor, however, cannot retreat. The revelation has changed her perspective, but it has also deepened her resolve. She knows she must find a way to break the cycle, not just for herself, but for her family and whatever remains of the entity's humanity. As she steps back into the cabin, the oppressive weight in the air feels charged with a new intensity, as if the unseen force now waits to see what she will do next. With the next phase of the journey in sight, Eleanor prepares herself for the ultimate confrontation. The weight of generations rests heavily on her shoulders, but she is resolute. She spreads the journal, the letter, and a series of artifacts she collected throughout the cabin onto the rickety table under the flickering light of a candle. The cryptic notes and symbols from her father's journal align eerily with the carvings she saw in the woods, forming a pattern that Eleanor painstakingly deciphers. Piece by piece, she constructs what appears to be an ancient ritual, part protection, part communication. The instructions are fragmented, leaving gaps that Eleanor fills with intuition and a growing sense of connection to the entity. As the storm outside intensifies, thunder rolling like a warning from the heavens, she gathers the components of the ritual: the earth-stained fabric from the compartment, a handful of stones from the clearing, and a shard of glass etched with the same unearthly symbols. Each item feels charged with a strange energy, as if the cabin itself acknowledges her preparations. Eleanor's hands tremble as she sets the stage, chalking out a crude circle on the warped wooden floor, with markings pulled from the journal's faded pages. Every movement feels guided, almost automatic, as though generations of her ancestors are acting through her. With a deep breath, she begins the ritual. Her voice wavers at first, but soon grows steady as she chants the incantation written in her father's notes, her words intertwining with the howling wind outside. The air inside the cabin grows unbearably cold, and the flickering candlelight gives way to an unnatural darkness that seems to seep from the walls themselves. The whispers grow louder, filling the room with a cacophony of anguish and rage. Yet beneath it all, Eleanor discerns something else, a plea, faint but unmistakable. Suddenly, the floorboards beneath her feet groan as though under immense pressure. The cabin quakes, and an unseen force surges through the air, knocking over furniture and extinguishing the remaining light. Eleanor clings to the edges of the circle she has drawn, her heart racing as she feels the presence of the entity closing in. Yet she does not waver. Instead, she speaks directly into the void, her voice firm despite the fear clawing at her insides. She demands to know the truth, pleading for an end to the suffering that has consumed both the entity and her family for generations. The air becomes impossibly still, and then, in a moment that feels like an eternity, the shadows before her coalesce into a faint, human-like form. It flickers, indistinct and shrouded in sorrow, but its presence is undeniable. The whispers transform into a voice broken, fragmented, but clear enough for Eleanor to understand. It reveals a devastating truth. Margaret's rituals did not only summon the entity. They bound it to the Whitmore bloodline, ensuring that the pain and torment would pass from one generation to the next unless someone broke the cycle. The entity is as much a victim as the family it haunts, trapped in a bond neither asked for. Eleanor's resolve hardens as she realizes the enormity of what must be done. The ritual she started is only the beginning. It must be completed with an act of release, a selfless offering to sever the connection. She takes the shard of glass, its edge biting into her palm, and lets her blood seep into the circle she has drawn. The cabin erupts in a whirlwind of energy, the entity's anguished cries filling the space as light and shadow clash in a violent storm. Through it all, Eleanor focuses on one thought: ending the cycle at any cost. As the chaos reaches its peak, everything falls silent. The oppressive weight in the air lifts, replaced by an overwhelming stillness. The faint figure of the entity lingers for a moment longer, now devoid of its earlier menace, before dissolving like mist. The cabin feels empty in a way it never has before, as though a great burden has finally been lifted. Eleanor collapses to the floor, drained but alive, the faint glow of dawn breaking through the shattered windows as the storm subsides. Yet as she catches her breath, a faint creak from the far corner of the room reminds her that some mysteries may never fully rest. As the sun rises on the next chapter, Eleanor steps outside the cabin, the weight of her ordeal evident in the slump of her shoulders. The forest, once oppressive and full of shadows, now feels strangely serene, as if it too has been freed from the entity's grasp. Each step she takes away from the cabin feels lighter, yet she cannot ignore the dull ache in her chest, a reminder of the sacrifice and the truth she uncovered. The journal, now stained and worn, rests firmly in her hand as she contemplates its future. Should she share what she has experienced, peeling back the veil of mystery that shrouds the cabin, or should she allow its secrets to fade into legend, protecting the world from the darkness she faced? Weeks later, Eleanor sits at her desk, the glow of her computer screen illuminating the room as she writes. The words come slowly, each one measured, deliberate. She crafts an article that teases the edges of her experience without fully revealing the cabin's true nature. The world deserves to know of the horrors and the haunting beauty of what lies deep in the woods, but she stops short of disclosing everything. Some truths, she decides, are too dangerous to share. She ends the piece with an open question. Was the cabin truly at peace, or had she simply quieted its tormented echoes for now? As the article circulates, whispers spread of the secluded cabin and Eleanor's cryptic tale. It becomes a story that captures imaginations and fuels speculation, leaving readers to decide for themselves what to believe. But Eleanor knows the reality. She knows the faces of those who came before her, the lives tangled in a fate they never chose, and she knows the figure she saw in the cabin's final moments, no longer a shadow of rage, but a flicker of sorrow, fading into the silence. One last time, Eleanor returns to the edge of the woods, the cabin just visible in the distance. Its weathered structure looks unchanged, as if untouched by the storm and the battle that took place within. She doesn't step closer, doesn't need to. Instead, she watches from afar, a quiet farewell forming in the back of her mind. As she turns and walks away, the wind stirs behind her, carrying with it a faint creak of the cabin's door. She doesn't look back. Some mysteries, she knows, are meant to be left unanswered, and as the screen fades to black, that image lingers, a solitary figure walking away as the forest slowly swallows the cabin once more. Perhaps the unseen entity is gone, or perhaps, somewhere in the silence, it waits, waiting for another Whitmore to uncover its tragic story, waiting for the cycle to begin again.